As regards what is happening in Gabon, I do not think it is triumphant yet, or the people of Gabon can rejoice. When they say it's the end of a Bongo dynasty, I said no. Because Nguema is actually first cousins with the person he toppled. So he's still in the Bongo clan, but just a different surname. And the question is, this same Nguema benefited from them. He was very rich. Now we are seeing pictures of the Senate president and other key government functionaries trying to cut away the remaining billions they have and then being apprehended. But this same Nguema, if you check what he has, is worth billions. So the people is still pretty much at disadvantage in all of this. Except they are forced to ensure there's a proper transition timeline and they return power back to a civilian elected leader. But if we don't do that, it's still in the same cycle. So it's not a break from the Odinga family. It's just another bunch of guys for their own interests. Thirdly, the things happening in Rwanda and Cameroon. The truth is, Paul Biya should know that it is time to go. Paul Kagame should know that it is time to go. P Square, Paul, they should know that it is time to go. If they are not getting the memo, they should get it now. Paul Biya got in there using all sorts of sentiments after President Ahijo. He has not gone. How can you lead a country where you hardly stay? The country Cameroon has snowballed into a lot of crisis now. You're having the Amazonian crisis because of bad leadership and marginalization. You are always somewhere in Europe with Madame Chantel, while the young people in your country suffer. Is it a time for all of this to be over in Cameroon? Because at the age of your 90s, you still want to go for another election cycle again. And even if we can commend Paul Kagame as a visionary for the modern Rwanda, your success is not as good until you have a successor. So rejigging the military will not be the best solution. The best solution will be, when is it time to hand over power to the people? Because you are not the people's hero. One way or the other, the people will find other heroes. You are just playing your part in history. And isn't it time for you to go? President Tinubu still talking, and I commend President Tinubu as regards what he's doing now in Niger, diplomacy, still talking with the Nigerians and saying we don't want war. Yes, he should talk more with the junta. And hopefully the junta too will be able to respond. But the junta too is also solidifying its base in power, trying as much as possible now to remove every vestige of France in the country. But the French ambassador says it's not going anywhere. That's a very sticky issue they should be careful about. But kudos to President Tinubu on this. Hopefully we solve the Niger crisis. And hopefully most African leaders also understand the implications of their actions, their bad leadership, their seat-tightism. And other African leaders too that have continued this. The Eyedema dynasty in Togo, the Sassou Nguessos of this world, the Theodore Obiang of this world. It can't last forever. We all saw what happened to Bouteflika. And Bouteflika thought he could be in Nigeria forever. It cannot last. All of these leaders should go back and learn from Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. When Mandela took power after being in incarceration for 27 years, Mandela could have chosen to be life president of South Africa. But have they ever asked why Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela said, I'm not the hero alone, and he did one term and he left? Today we shower encomiums on Mandela. Other leaders go and learn what make Mandela tick before you quote him. Good morning.
Okay, first, let's start with Niger. Niger saying that they had expelled the French ambassador to Niger, having given him an ultimatum to leave the country. Well, France had responded to say that, look, what they have in Niger is an illegal government. But the reality is that Chiani and his group, they are the ones who are currently in charge of power in that country, while the AU and the rest of the international community is trying to find a solution to the unconstitutional takeover of power in that country. However, it's a matter of diplomacy. The 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, 1961, that is, Article 9, says that a receiving state can declare a diplomat in a particular country a persona non grata. A persona non grata means that diplomat is no longer welcome in that particular jurisdiction, and that the state will not be responsible for anything with regard to the diplomatic immunity that diplomatic and consular officers are entitled to. So technically, what the guys in charge in Niger have done is to say this particular representative of France in Niger can no longer enjoy any form of immunity. It's also an indirect way of saying his safety cannot be guaranteed under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic and Consular Relations. So effectively, I think France will have a responsibility to worry about the safety of their diplomat in Niger, because you cannot impose, as a sending state, a diplomat on a receiving state. And you cannot insist on keeping your diplomat there against the wish of the receiving state. And the receiving state, in fact, needs not to give any explanation. And that is why you see that the Nigerian authorities have refused to give any explanation. So that is that about Niger. And in conflict situations such as this, as you have seen between Russia and Ukraine, and also between the United States and Ecuador, at a particular point, a diplomat can be expelled. That is that about that. So it's not about grandstanding and saying, we are France, we want to keep our man there by force. Now, two, the reaction from Paul Kagame, who has retired 83 senior military officers and immediately replaced them. 83. And also the old man in Cameroon, Paul Biya, who suddenly, regained life and also decided to retire senior military officers. Paul Biya has been in power for about 41 years. One of those sit-tight leaders in Africa who keep staying on and changing the constitution. Paul Kagame has had to change the constitution in Rwanda that will keep him in power till 2034. He has been there, he has been in power there for about 27 years, but he still wants to say till 2034. And now, having seen what President Tinubu described as autocratic contagion, or what he described as the copycat syndrome that seems to be emerging with regard to unconstitutional takeover of power, those persons who think that they too may be affected are quickly moving fast to prevent any kind of contagion in their own areas. But will it protect them? Because as we have seen in Mali, as we have seen in Guinea, Conakry, as we have seen in Niger, also in Chad twice, the persons who organize these schools, they are usually persons in charge of special forces. In Mali, Assimi Goita was head of the special forces. In Gabon, as you are seeing now, the man there, is the head of the Presidential Republican Guard. So these are persons who have direct access to the president. And so, in the case of the Rwandese president, Paul Kagame and Paul Biya, it will appear that the statement is true after all, that the guilty are afraid. The reason why African leaders don't have to panic like that is for them to provide such good governance so that they can be kept in place by the goodwill and faith of their own people. Now, Nigeria is not left out. Yesterday, we were told that the GOC 81 Div of the Nigerian army, was telling the troops that anybody who is not loyal to President Tinubu should just leave the armed forces, and that they must show loyalty, discipline, professionalism, fine, good talk. But the only objection I have to his statement is that he kept talking about you must be loyal to President Tinubu. No, the Nigerian Armed Forces, it's not about loyalty to a person. It's about loyalty to the Nigerian Constitution. It's the constitutional order we are talking about here, not about individuals. Because when the general was going on, you must be loyal to President Tinubu and all that. No, the Nigerian military must be loyal to the Constitution. And the only way of changing power that the Constitution of Nigeria recognizes is through the ballot box. And that is why the coup in all these other African countries, the coups are being condemned because they go outside the framework of the Constitution. Now, beyond all of this, is President Tinubu's further intervention, meeting with the Nigerian Council of Islamic Affairs and urging them to keep mediating in the crisis in Niger. Well, that's fine, because in any case, the needful had been done in terms of condemning military intervention in that country, but it is good to see that the ECOWAS chairman, who doubles also as Nigerian president, is now telling us that, look, the option of negotiation, mediation, has not been ruled out. The coup makers in Niger, they say they want to stay for 3 years. The Algerians have intervened through their foreign minister, who has put a proposal on the table recommending a 6-month transition plan. So, well, would a 6-month transition plan be acceptable? These are part of the questions in the air. But the African Union has taken the usual programmatic step of suspending Gabon, from the African Union. Well, they did the same thing with Mali. African Union did the same thing with Niger, right? Now they've done the same thing with Gabon. But the question to ask is, look, yes, the AU Commission can make pronouncements through, its chairperson. The African Peace and Security Council of the, or Committee of the African Union can talk about the constitutive acts of the African Union, but why is it that the AU has become so ineffectual in changing the trend of, a reckless usurpation of power in one African country to the other? These are issues that are still on the table. But the bigger consensus, of course, is that nobody agrees in any way with any form of violent disruption of the constitutional order in Africa. Because as you have seen now, it has led to a copycat syndrome that is even making the sit-tight leaders very uncomfortable. I hope they will get their lesson here that, one, you don't violate the electoral process and impose your will on the people. You allow institutions to work. Two, that you don't tamper with the constitutional term limits, as Paul Kagame has done, and as has also been done in Cameroon. That three, sovereignty belongs to the people, not to the big man who thinks that, he's in power, he can keep perpetuating himself in power at the extent, at the expense, to the negative interest of the people that they are supposed to serve.
Well, just as has been mentioned, let me start with the area of the reshuffling by the president of Rwanda and the president of Cameroon. And as has widely been said, and analysts have observed, is that it's a response to the coups that have happened, 8 in number already, especially for countries that were colonized by the French. And so Rwanda and Cameroon, who are also Francophone countries, have decided to make a move in what is believed to be, a proactive measure to preventing an occurrence in their countries. It's already been established that President Paul Biya of Cameroon has been president since 1982, whilst President Kagame has been there for over 20 years. What one would imagine, as has been said a number of times this week, is that these presidents, who are sit-tight presidents, sit-tight leaders in their country, would, as a response, begin to put measures in place to strengthen institutions, and even start to look out for a way out to retire. So it demonstrates that even with the coups, it's not enough, measure, it's not enough statement to persuade these leaders to leave office. Instead, what they've decided to do is to reshuffle their military to ensure that they continue to sit tight. Even President Paul Biya at over 90 years old. And so we must begin to ask questions amongst ourselves here on the African continent. What is wrong with the style of leadership and government on the African continent? Why has the sit-tight style of leadership continued to thrive? It's because of things like this, where a president or a leader who is democratically elected in many cases, in fact, if you look at many of their elections, let's even talk about that, they're usually marred with irregularities. So the process to gaining power in itself is flawed. And when the process is flawed, it begs belief as to how the leader will rule. It is almost impossible for the leader, or it is in very rare cases, that the leader or the president will obey the rule of law when he gets into office. Because when you're campaigning and you're during electioneering season where you don't have the power of the state, you take on power by any means possible. And so, first of all, the process by which our leaders get elected, we must check that process and strengthen it. A lot of times, the president oversees or has influence, huge influence on the electioneering body. We have electioneering bodies across the country. So if we're going to look at that, it's the process, first of all, of getting in there. And once they get there, the same institutions that they weaken are the same institutions that will work against them, as we've seen in all the countries where coups have taken place. Let's talk about Western and international interference, because some of these coups are actually sponsored by Western interests. So when we talk about coups not being the best option, some people say, oh no, it's time to take the power back. But again and again, we have seen from history that the people end up suffering. Coups are usually not with good intentions. They are not noble. They're not done because they want to. That's the narrative until the military coupist or a hunter takes over. Then you see that it was just a matter of interest not aligning. And that's why you would see that many of those things happen with people who have enjoyed and benefited from the leaders themselves. The presidential guards, those who have worked with the president closely, have benefited immensely. Look at their lives. So for those who are rejoicing and celebrating now, look at the lives of the people. Ngwame is very rich. What's the source of his wealth? So a corrupt man taking on power forcefully in an illegal manner, and you're expecting the best from him, you're expecting good, it's hardly going to work. And so the people must then insist that the leaders that they elect strengthen institutions and obey the rule of law. That's why we keep talking about it. And when, in some cases, when we talk about strengthening institutions, the judiciary, the legislature, and the other arms of government, people say, oh, it's attacking the present-day government. No, it is protecting the nation. It is protecting nations such that we don't have incidents like this. And so the response from these leaders demonstrates that they are not yet serious about the issue of governance and democracy in their countries. They are looking for ways to ensure that they continue to perpetrate illegality. That is what this has demonstrated. It is not done in the interest of the people. It is not done in the interest of the country. It is done for self-interest, so that they bring their loyalists closer and they continue to reign, because it's no longer governance. It is reigning. It is a monarchy. Even if, like in the case of Rwanda, the country, analyzing it, it looks like President Paul Kagame has done quite well in terms of governance, but well is relative. Good governance is relative. Yes, compared to other parts of Africa, Rwanda seems to be working. But if the fundamentals are not in place, no matter how great the system is, it means that there's potential abuse without any way to check and balance his leadership. So these are some of the issues. Now, of course, when these coups happened, countries like Equatorial Guinea will be concerned. Countries like Cameroon will be concerned. Countries like the Republic of Congo will be concerned because these are sit-tight. These are countries where the leaders have continued to sit tight in government. So just to mention that the reshuffling, of course, it shows that they are concerned, but it also shows even deeper that these leaders are still not willing to learn or allow democracy to thrive in their nations. Then moving back to the people's responsibility. Oftentimes, what is called democracy in Africa, in many countries in Africa, is actually there's a concept of electocracy, whereby the people are only involved in government during election season. So they need you, and you just see it play out in many African countries. The people are just there so that when it's time for an election cycle, their thumbs are printed on the ballot, or they cast their ballot, and then, bye-bye, see you later, 4 years, we'll talk again. The people are not involved in the process of governance. The people are not consulted. It's not government for the people, by the people, for the people. It is government elected by the people for the elites. So we need to rethink the democracy that we practice on the African continent. That's something else. And the people, the office of the citizen being the most powerful office, must begin to take its position. Active citizenship. Begin to hold your elected leaders to account. A number of people don't know who their local government chairmen are, don't know who their representatives are. The only thing they know is when it's 4 years' time, you find a way to ensure that you are settled during elections, and we'll see you in 4 years' time. Democracy will not thrive in these conditions. And just to say finally, with regards to the Niger situation, again, it's great kudos to the president, that's President Bola Tinubu, and the chairman of ECOWAS, in terms of saying that they would explore all diplomatic options. It means that he's listening. It means that the agitations of the people living in the north, the Muslim community, and other leaders, he's listening to what people are saying, and that's quite critical and important. What we are hoping, though, is that after negotiations and after conversations and dialogue, Niger would be willing to partner on this diplomatic route, because it doesn't look like it currently. He already talked about the fact that war doesn't benefit anyone, citing the example of Ukraine, citing the example of countries who are in war situations. So it is important to know that for those who push the narrative of let's go, military action, we have to go to war, war is not the option. War is not an option in this case, has been said. It's too expensive, we can't afford it, humanitarian crisis on our hands. And so we are hoping that the president will continue to explore the diplomatic channels.